Were the protesters against the United States in its Vietnam War policy justified in their opposition? Do you believe that you can be justified in taking a stand against your nation and its institutions and its actions? What do you think justifies such opposition? Appeal to universal moral principles? Appeal to universal legal principles? Appeal to religious beliefs against killing? Appeal to your own private conscience? Appeal to God Himself? The philosophy of Hegel will shock you by cutting off any appeals to anything outside your nation and its institutions. In the philosophy of Hegel, there is no moral authority above the state. There are no moral or legal or religious principles that transcend the state. Beyond the state, there is no higher court of appeal. Does this claim, which is central to Hegel's philosophy, run counter to all your beliefs? Then it is time for us to take a look at Hegel's moral and political philosophy. Hegel's approach to moral philosophy has its source in his organicism, his view that nothing human can be understood, that nothing human can function in isolation, but rather only as a part of the organic totality to which it belongs and which it serves. For Hegel, the nation-state, which includes the government of a nation and also its culture, is this great organism to which everything human belongs. This organic totality, which is the nation-state, is the source of all our culture, including all our morality. The ethical life for the individual member of society is provided, according to Hegel, by the culture itself, by the spirit of the people as it is embodied in the institutions of society, in the legal, political, economic, religious, and educational institutions of the society. You can live a moral life, says Hegel, only by acting in accordance with the moral principles expressed by your own society in all its own institutions. In your moral life, as well as in your beliefs, your personal goals, your philosophy, you are a culture carrier, a receptacle for the moral values which are embodied in the political and economic way of life and in the religious and educational institutions of your society. The moral values that are embodied in your nation and your culture provide the only morality you have, your only moral ideals, your only moral obligations. The moral life has its source only in the nation and can be fulfilled only in the nation. In the writings of Hegel, as he says, despite much lofty talk about universal principles or religious ethics, Hegel's point is that all ethics is social ethics, the ethics of a particular society, that the moral life is the life lived in accordance with the moral standards of your own society. In Hegel's own words, in Reason in History, he says, "Everything that man is, he owes to the state. Only in it can he find his essence. All value that a man has, all spiritual reality he has only through the state." And again, in Reason in History, Hegel says, "No individual can step beyond the state. He can separate himself certainly from other particular individuals, but not from the spirit of the people." You cannot, he says, separate yourself from the beliefs and values of your own society in your own time. But do you not find yourself rejecting Hegel's social ethics? Ethics which has no other ground than the values of a particular society goes against the grain. Are you not thinking that the spirit of the people may go wrong, may become immoral, even demonically evil? For example, in periods of witch hunts, as in the witch hunts of Salem, Massachusetts in the 17th century, and in the witch hunts of McCarthyism in the 1950s in the United States government. And surely a government can go wrong, as the Watergate episode in the United States government clearly shows. How then can Hegel claim that our culture and our government are, as he says, the very substance of ethics? Hegel has an answer. It is that our very criticism of Watergate as a moral and legal scandal is based upon the moral and legal ideals of our own United States culture. Hegel has never argued, he will tell you, that actual cultures or governments are perfect. Rather, his point is that our ideals are those that our own culture has produced. And these are the ideals to which we appeal when we criticize our government. And so, for example, when we criticize the government for denying voting rights to blacks on the grounds that the government was not living up to its own Constitution and the 15th Amendment, which states that the rights of citizens to vote shall not be denied or abridged on account of race, color, or previous condition of servitude. This is the democratic ideal that has shaped the legal and political and educational institutions of our society. And in appealing to this, we have shaped our own lives. For we have internalized these ideals and moral beliefs of our society. We have made them part of our inner lives as our own ideals. And moreover, Hegel has a trump card to play. And that is, from Hegel's viewpoint, there is something sacred, something divine about the state. For in incorporating the totality of culture and government, the state, he says, embodies and manifests the absolute. In Hegel's words, the nation-state is the divine idea as it exists on earth. Hegel is here trying to express something close to the Old Testament utterance that God will deliver his judgment to the nations. For Hegel, God manifests one stage of his truth to each of the key nations of history, and each in its historical turn becomes a carrier of his divine truth. We are now able to probe more deeply into Hegel's theory that ethics is social ethics. If you as an individual live as a contributing member of the nation-state, you are participating in the life of the absolute, which the culture expresses. You are participating in a larger life than that of your personal, individual desires and concerns. The moral center of your life as an individual is then not merely yourself as an isolated atom, but this larger life of the spirit of the whole people, the spirit of the unfolding absolute. In participating in the life of our nation and its culture, we live beyond ourselves in the larger life of developing truth. And we live this larger spiritual life by taking part in the public life and the public process of our time, in which all the standards, values, moral and political beliefs, and the aspirations of the culture come to the surface, are debated, are thought through, and undergo dialectical development. By participating in the ongoing public life, you enter into the truth for your time, into the life of the absolute as it is manifested in your culture. This is what Hegel's moral philosophy means by its insistence that ethics is social ethics. In total opposition to the Enlightenment and its idealizing of the single autonomic individual as rational, autonomous, and independent with his own rights and freedom, Hegel has discovered that the greatest of all the needs of the human being is not to be independent and autonomous, but to participate in a larger purpose than his own and to become part of the social whole. You cannot help feeling the power of what Hegel is saying here. He is touching a sore and sensitive spot with us, our sense of living in isolation, our sense of living in a world which has become fragmented and atomized, our sense that there is no larger totality to which we belong. Hegel speaks to our present need for wholeness, our need to sense that we are part of a larger, meaningful totality. And we know that at the time that he was writing, he was speaking to the needs of the German people for wholeness, their need to form into a unified and strong nation. How then, according to Hegel, do I acquire the moral beliefs of my culture, and thus a sense of belonging? Hegel's answer is that you acquire the beliefs of your culture by the process of internalizing them, by making them a part of yourself, by incorporating them, by appropriating them to yourself. You incorporate the ethical substance, the morality of your culture, says Hegel, as you develop as a person from early childhood into maturity. This development, this growth process in your personal history takes a dialectical form in which there are three stages, three important moments which constitute the ethical life of an individual in society. These three stages are first the family, second, as antithesis to the family, is civil society, and thirdly, is the synthesis of these in the state. The family, says Hegel, is the first way in which the self enters into the moral life of the community. The family is the initial social group which one experiences. In the family, there is a sense of unity, a unity of feeling. A bond of love unites the family members. The members of the family do not relate to each other, says Hegel, as persons with individual rights as against the other members of the family, but as members of a unity. When, however, he says, it happens that family members relate to each other through insisting upon their individual rights, the rights of children against their parents, or of husbands and wives against each other, rather than through their unity of feeling, that family, he says, is in process of dissolution and decay. Is he saying something about the contemporary American family, or about a family that you know? But Hegel next points out that the child outgrows the family and passes over into a new stage of life, which is that of the larger civil society. But in the transition to the new stage of life, the young adult becomes a self-conscious individual in his own personality, with his or her own will, his aspirations, life plans, and social connections. In these ways, the person becomes individuated, separated from the family, and enters civil society. By civil society, Hegel means the economic aspect of society, the society from the standpoint of the ways in which human individuals relate to each other in terms of their economic needs and interests, in terms of their relationship to work. Hegel had studied very carefully the writings of the economist Adam Smith and the books of other British economists before himself writing on civil society. Karl Marx will soon be bending over the same books. Civil society, Hegel says, is a scene in which individuals are striving to fulfill their own economic needs. But in order to do so, they must require the work of others. They require that there be a division of labor so that there can be a more efficient production of goods to satisfy the needs of an ongoing and growing society. Hegel sees in the economic relations within a society the working of the cunning of reason, which we saw already at work within history. As human individuals, he says, work for their own personal needs and gains, they are in actuality, although they do not intend this themselves, they are actually fulfilling the interests of the economy as a whole. They are making the wheels of the economy go round. But Hegel sees that the economy of a society can run into problems. As production increases to meet the needs of the increase in population, some individuals will achieve great wealth, but at the same time there arises a working class, an urban proletariat, which may suffer both economic and spiritual poverty. As this urban proletariat finds itself tied to boring mechanical work and increasingly suffers from unemployment, they lose their sense of identity with the society, and they become, says Hegel, a discontented and alienated mass. While at the opposite pole there has been created great wealth for a few members of society. Hegel's description of the polarization within industrial society of two groups, the small, wealthy capitalist class and the constantly enlarging proletarian class of laborers, his description is almost identical with the picture of civil society which Karl Marx will paint a generation later. But there is one crucial difference between Hegel and Marx on this point. Hegel sees the inner conflicts of the industrial economy as clearly as Marx does, but Hegel sees that the state can hold these conflicts in check, while Hegel accordingly places the state in political and moral control of the entire industrial economy in order to maximize its positive functions and to minimize its internal tensions. Marx, on the other hand, totally rejects Hegel's conception that the state can effectively control civil society, and Marx calls for a revolutionary overthrow of the entire capitalist economy as the only solution to its problems, and as the next and necessary and the last stage of human history. What then does Hegel finally say about the state? First and foremost, through the concrete actual functions of its social institutions, the state provides the ethical substance of a society. And thus, says Hegel, the state makes freedom possible. At this point, Hegel contributes what has become a famous distinction between two kinds of freedom, formal freedom and substantial freedom. There is, he says, the freedom which was pursued by the Enlightenment. This was the formal, abstract, rational freedom which the individual gains by the natural rights of life, liberty, and property. These freedoms, says Hegel, were essentially negative freedoms. They protect the individual in his rights to his life, liberty, and possessions from the absolute power of the king to seize them from him. But what is now needed, says Hegel, is not negative freedom, but a positive, concrete sense of freedom. What is now needed is not an empty, formal, negative freedom from oppressors, but substantial, positive freedom to live and act as a free spiritual being. What does substantial freedom mean? You have substantial freedom, says Hegel, when the ideals of your nation become your own ideals for directing your own life. You are substantially free when you see that the ideals by which the state and the culture define themselves are also the ideals by which you define yourself. For example, as a United States citizen committed to civil rights, you see that the state, that is the government of the United States, defines itself as committed to civil rights. In this way it comes about that the laws of the United States no longer appeal alien or oppressive to you. They appear instead as identical to your own laws for yourself. And thus there comes to an end, says Hegel, the opposition between your individual freedom and the power of social laws. There comes to an end your sensing that the laws of your state are coercive upon you and are a heavy yoke for you to bear. And again, says Hegel, in this way there disappears the opposition between your personal will and the will of the state, since you have now identified your own will with the larger will, which is that of the state. This, then, is the meaning of substantial freedom. Substantial freedom consists in the identification of the personal will with the ethical ideals of the culture and the state. And Hegel adds, substantial freedom is the condition of human happiness. Human happiness is to live in a state in which you can freely identify with its laws and all the institutions, and in which you can will freely through your own will what the state wills. Happiness, says Hegel, is the reward of identifying with the ideals of your society. It is the happiness that comes from the ending of conflict. It is the happiness of the sense of belonging, of feeling at one with the group to which one belongs. And this substantial freedom is what Hegel thought was emerging into being for his own German nation. But what if you do not identify with your society? What if you are not reconciled to the ideals and institutions of your society? What if you still harbor the suspicions and hatreds toward the culture and government of the United States, which many people felt during the Civil Rights Movement and the Vietnam War? You exist then, says Hegel, in a state of alienation. And Hegel has a theory of alienation, a concept which we think of as very contemporary with us. We will see Marx picking up the theory of alienation from Hegel, and in time the entire Western world learned about alienation from Hegel and from Marx, so that in the 20th century, Sartre will find the theme of alienation present everywhere in contemporary culture. What is the meaning of alienation, and what specifically does Hegel mean by it? Alienation is, in general, the sense of being estranged, the sense of feeling alone, shut out of the common life, the sense of being an outsider. Do you find it meaningless to vote? Does your job have no significance for you? Are you bored by the social and political issues of the day that other people get violently passionate about? Do you feel that your life is meaningless, powerless, and empty? These are the symptoms of alienation. Alienation is the failure of the will of the individual to identify with the larger will of the society. And just as substantial freedom, which is identification with the will of society, just as substantial freedom is a necessary condition of happiness, so alienation from society is a necessary condition of unhappiness. For the individual, alienation exists when you find that the ideals and institutions by which your society defines itself appear to you to be meaningless, and they form no part of you. Alienation is the condition in which you no longer identify yourself with the public morality and values and institutions of your society. And lastly, it is of great significance that Hegel finds political and social individualism as a serious form of alienation. Individualism, on Hegel's view, is a solvent, it is a destroyer of national and community unity. How then does Hegel define individualism? Individualism, as it is usually defined in political terms, is the view that the state is subordinate to the individual, politically and morally. For political individualism, the state is made for man, not man for the state. But as we have seen, just the opposite is Hegel's view. Hegel has consistently argued that the state is superior to the individual. In fact, that the state is the only true individual of history, and that the human individual is no better than a part of the organism which is the state. It is furthermore Hegel's view that the individual has no inalienable natural rights, such as John Locke and Thomas Jefferson claimed. Hegel argues that the individual has only those rights and liberty which the state prescribes for him as serving the institutions of society. And as we have seen, the moral value and the very meaning of a human being's life are derived from the organic totality of the culture of which he is a part, according to Hegel. Hegel's political philosophy must therefore be called statism, or political absolutism. Political absolutism affirms the subordination of the individual to the state and claims for the state absolute political power and moral authority over the individual. For political absolutism, the individual exists for the state, not the state for the individual. In Hegel's own words, the state has supreme right against the individual, whose supreme duty it is to be a member of the state. Hegel has here taken his firm stand against the fundamental principle of democracy, universal voting privileges, the direct suffrage for all. In place of universal voting, Hegel calls for the people to be represented in the legislature, but their representatives will in no case be elected by the people. Finally, what is Hegel's view of the power of philosophy to direct the political future of a nation or of the world? We saw that the French Enlightenment found philosophy had given them a true theory to put into practice in order to change the world. Hegel disagrees. Hegel denies that philosophy has the power to change the course of a nation or of the world. The philosopher, he says, is concerned only with understanding what is actual and is not concerned with offering predictions or utopias for the future. And for the philosopher to understand the actual society, it is necessary for the philosopher to go to the roots of that society in order to see the rational concept which the Absolute has revealed to it and which has been coming to consciousness over the years in the life of the nation. Philosophy can grasp the truth of a culture only when the culture has matured enough so that what the Absolute has revealed to it has finally become clear. But by this time, says Hegel, it is too late for the society to change. Hegel makes this point in a famous line in which he refers to the owl, which was a symbol of Minerva, the Roman goddess of wisdom. Hegel expresses the thought that philosophic wisdom comes too late within any society to be able to transform it, but can only instead make it possible for the society to understand itself, to grasp the meaning of its own culture and the truth of the Absolute which it embodies. But this understanding is only insight, interpretation, wisdom. It comes too late to change things. This is Hegel's famous line: "The owl of Minerva spreads its wings and takes flight only when the shades of night are falling." But this is exactly what Karl Marx will challenge. Philosophy, he says, has so far only interpreted the world. The point, however, is to change it. And Marx believed that we now have the philosophy to put into practice in order to change the world. The power of Hegel as a master builder of philosophy cannot be denied. Yet serious criticisms of him can be made. Does Hegel's idealistic philosophy, in which reality is only the reality of the concept, the idea, does this give us an adequate grasp of the material side of reality, the problems of the human body in its material environment, the problem of economic production, the problems of technology and its impact, and the problem of the exhaustion of the material resources of the material environment? And again, with regard to God, if Hegel's absolute, which he calls God, exists only as he is externalized or embodied in human consciousness, then how can this legitimately be called God or absolute? Is this not a deception, an equivocation? Is this not what we would call double talk? Also, what kind of method is dialectic? Clearly, it is not a rationalistic, a logical, or mathematical method. Clearly, it is not empirical and scientific. Is this then to be called a method of interpretation and insight into the development of human consciousness? But how can Hegel's own insights be proven? How can Hegel prove that the laws of dialectic or history govern the world and are necessary? How does he know what each stage of the dialectic is? For example, how can he prove that Germany is the final synthesis and the very pinnacle of history, rather than England or France? Are Hegel's dialectical insights rational truths, or are they perhaps cultural prejudices? Is Hegel's abstract philosophy a mask which conceals a defense of German nationalism, a fear of revolution, a hatred for individualism and democracy? Has not Hegel's dialectical philosophy cunningly used the cunning of reason in order to justify whatever exists in the status quo, even evils within it, as serving the purpose of the absolute? But on the other hand, Hegel is a great source of wisdom, and his philosophy gave to the world many concepts of the greatest profundity: the spirit of a people, the concept of culture, organicism and historicism, the dialectical tendency of thought, the master-slave concept, a new theory of the relation of the individual to society, the theory of ethics as culturally rooted, a theory of labor, a theory of leadership, a theory of the human need for wholeness through social identification, and a theory of alienation. These concepts and theories, which originated in Hegel's philosophy, are to be found throughout the social sciences today, in social anthropology, sociology, social psychology, political theory, psychoanalysis, and clinical psychology. But Hegel's influence is not only upon these sciences which study man, but also upon philosophy itself. One French philosopher recently stated Hegel's influence with these words: all the great philosophical ideas of the past century, the philosophies of Marx, of Nietzsche, of existentialism, and psychoanalysis, had their beginning in Hegel. Of all these influences, Hegel's greatest influence was upon Karl Marx, and his impact upon the entire world, East and West. To Marx we now turn.